Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hope you guys are doing good. Thanks for taking the time to tune in once again. Today we're gonna just continue reading a great book we've been reading, which is this one right here, Ancient and Modern Britons. But we're gonna get into volume 2. Yeah, we read volume 1. We're at many chapters of volume 1. We got some great information. We're going to get into volume 2 now of this book. And of course, this book is by David MacRitchie. So shout out to David MacRitchie for writing such a great, these two great volumes. A lot of good information he's sharing, and it has a lot of sources that you can verify. Again, before we begin, these are the previous parts to this series. You can find a playlist just by going to the playlist tab on my homepage, and you will find one that is called Ancient and Modern Britons. We got 9 parts so far. Again, we read a lot of good chapters in volume 1. Today we'll be moving on to volume 2. So check out all the previous parts. There's 9 of them, as you guys can see here, if you haven't. So again, we're in the book Ancient and Modern Britons, a retrospect. Again, volume 2 from 1884 by David MacRitchie. Again, we're in volume 2 and we're in book 3 of this series of writings by David MacRitchie. And we're going to skim through chapters 1, 2, and 3. It's actually, a lot of it is a review of what we read in volume 1 with some new added info. We're going to go over the main points, and then we're going to get into chapter 4. Again, we're just going to go over some things in these first chapters. In chapter 1, in regards to William Marshall, a famous historical gypsy from this time, it says, who was this man? And what is one to make of all these statements, apparently so much at variance with each other? Is there in all history a figure more difficult to place? In this William Marshall thinker, we have a real historical man, and yet one who contradicts the received ideas of history at every turn. The King of Galloway, gypsies, lurking in some mountain defile with his gang of dark-skinned crimson, all right, again, dark-skinned, crimson-visaged desperados, ready to rob and murder at the first opportunity, differs very little from the leader of any band of dark-skinned, crimson-visaged Wasatch braves. They're talking about American Indians, comparing them to the dark-skinned American Indians ambuscating in some western gulch. And yet this Scottish Indian was the nephew of a naval officer in the service of William of Orange. Continuing a little further ahead, it says here the lovelock of the 17th century cavaliers may or may not have a racial meaning, but at any rate, worn as it was on the left side, dependent from the ear and decorated with a knot of riband, its effect combined with a dark complexion, have been very gypsy-like. All right, a lock and dark complexion, very gypsy-like, and there must have been many such gypsies among the cavaliers of the 17th century. Hear that, guys? Not the least notable of whom was Charles II, who was, if Marvel's picture is a true one, of a tall stature and a sable hue. Remember Charles II, we got a whole video proving he was a so-called black man. He was described as the black boy. Guys, remember, I got a whole video on that. And down here it says, and it would be impossible to show that the wearers of the lovelocks were mostly men of swarthy complexion. A little ahead of chapter 1 regarding, again, William Marshall. There's a note here, it says, Marshall, it may be remembered, is pictured to us as a short, thick, set little fellow with dark, quick eyes. And the same writer says, of the formidable corsair, that he was a short, thick, little fellow, above 5 feet 8 in height, and of a dark, swarthy complexion. He too was a native of Galloway. Although a man above 5 feet 8 is only little in the eyes of tall men, yet the general appearance of Jones' figure, short and thick-set, is a token of what Mr. Simpson might call a thorough gypsy. For he tells us that with gypsies of mixed blood, the individual, if he takes after the gypsy, is apt to be short and thick-set. A little more down it says, Alan McRory, the black-skinned Hebridean pirate of the 15th century is one notable instance, and others of the same kind may be seen in those blueskins, green and blue, Collins and Donalds, that infested the Hebridean creeks at about that period or later. In Highland tradition, there are many sea thinkers, such as the blacksmith of Drontian, and in this Galloway district, especially the legendary Blackamoor, Black Murray, or Black Douglas, is remembered in one account as a sea rover, and in another as one of a company of seafaring Moors or Saracens. And as on the land, so on the sea, they assume quite national proportions when one looks at them from a still greater distance, before their numbers had been diminished by conquest, or their individuality rendered indistinct by their blending with white-skinned races. When in short they were savage, seafaring, black heathen, known under various historical names, sacking churches and monasteries, killing and ravaging, and on one time actually conquering the greater portion of the British Isles. Apparently then, this patriarchal leader of the Tory section of the Galloway Foss, remember them? I'm going to show you, if you don't remember, was a genuine descendant of the ancient Moors or Picts. Same dark skin, dark complexion people. Of the conservative remnants of these races, other examples were seen in the Grahams, remember that means so-called black, and the Moors or Gypsies of the debatable land, who proved the purity of their ancestry, if in no other way by the resistance they offered to the would-be claimants of their territory, and doing which they showed indistinctively that they, and no other, were the Grahams of that debatable district. Continue a little ahead. It says, so many of these border Moors were distinguished by this title of grim or black, that one cannot very easily discriminate, but this Hughie the Grim, apparently the most ferocious of all those who bore that name, seems to be the same as Grimmy the border outlaw, and Grimmy the outlaw of Galloway. Perhaps so, perhaps not. We saw that a redoubtable Douglas, known historically under that equivalent of grimy, Murray, black, was Archibald the Grim, or Black. I told you it means black. And one or other of the three titles just given may apply to a descendant of his. Like the Douglases proper, Grimy, the border outlaw, was lord of a castle, thereby a black castle, situated at the head of the Vale of Fleet. All right, so real quick, if you guys, haven't watched this video, I did a video about 2 years ago on the original Swarthy Gypsies, as it says here on the cover, the forgotten Swarthy Gypsies, the king's tenants, wanderers from Tamari or Egypt. Go ahead and check that out. We talk about this person right here, Charles. They call him Charles II, Charles Fa, right, or the Fa family. They're talking about here. As you guys can see, this is a colorized image of him right here. All right, this is what they're showing us on the previous page. As it says here in the Scotsman, Scotland's lost gypsy kings and queens and the borders palace of the other royal family. He was the last of Scotland's gypsy kings and was crowned in front of 10,000 spectators, 200 horses, and the cream of the borders gentry, with the ceremony climaxing when a hair was placed around his neck and a bottle of whiskey cracked over his head. You guys hear that? So that's the image right there. I'm showing in the video, the original. So Charles Fa Bliff, or King Charles II. Charles Fa, so he's from the Fa family, famous gypsy family, and he's a Swarthy. He was a Swarthy person, all right? Swarthy. So continue still in chapter 1 of volume 2 of the book. In regards to the feuds that the gypsies had amongst themselves, some families, it says here, with reference to the never-ending feud between the Baileys and those Faws, right, what we just saw, to whom this descriptive epithet eventually clung as a surname. And when the Galloway writer adds that the outlawed Grammy stipulated for a sum of money in the meantime and a future annuity by way of black meal, he indicates a notorious practice of such gypsies as Henry the Faw, who exacted a similar tribute from men of considerable fortune on the southern border in the beginning of the 18th century, of such gypsies as the leader of that tribe, which a modern writer tells us for years levied blackmail over the country of Aberdeen, about the same period, or of those black watches, generally who we saw in a preceding chapter used to traverse the highlands about that era, and to whom there was yearly paid in blackmail or watch money, openly and privately, the sum of £5,000, and in all these cases, as in that of the tribute of the Black Army, which a White King nation of Wales was forced to pay to the Swarthy pirates, whom history known as the Danes, or Cimbri Danes, Swarthy pirates, or as in that of the yearly sum exacted from the Roman Empire in the 5th century by the probable kinsmen and ancestors of these Black Danes, the equally Swarthy Huns. In all these cases, the tax was most fitly and naturally designated black mail or tribute. The distinction then between such Grimes as Hughie Grimey, the horse stealer, and such Grimes as are mentioned by various gypsy writers under the title of gypsies is only one of nomenclature, and even this distinction vanishes when one reflects that grime, strictly interpreted, is more or black man, okay? The use of nicknames seems indeed to have been regarded as a peculiarity of the black races, since a nickname is sometimes spoken as a black. It may be said that the use of descriptive names is not peculiar to any race, but is merely primitive custom, and this may be readily admitted without any damage to the argument, for it is only another way of saying that the Tories of Scotland are nothing else than archaic Scotchmen. A little further ahead says, like their kinsmen, the Swarthy minstrels and jugglers of the southern portion of the island during medieval times, the Moorish divisions of the Scotch nation have been the minstrels of the north, and conversely, the minstrels, wherever they can be seen, are Moors. The songs that the people of the Northwest used to carol as they went along were the ancient songs of that district, and the singers were gypsies, members of that then lowest rank of peasantry, whose females in the speech of the local aristocracy were black girls, and whose vernacular was black speech. Of these, over in chapter 2, we're on page 54, it says, if they were disposed, Scottish nobles of the 15th century, as the Black Douglases were. Remember, we got all this on the first volume, what they're talking about. If you haven't watched the previous parts, make sure to check them out. They would shelter themselves from the rain and snow under the covering of the turf-built conical wigwams, or the low, half-open tents of skin or of canvas, which were then the common building of their country, all right? Wigwams like Indians. Remember that. We got that in volume 1, though we now call them the habitations of gypsies. And if these outlawed nobles were the descendants of any of the earlier Maori or blackamoors of Scotland, or of the later black foreigners, as were the Galloway Earls just referred to, and as were innumerable other clans, some of black folks, right? Of the race of Dub, the three black divisions. Dub. Then these coteries of marauding kings and dukes were in every detail the people whom writers generally speak of as gypsies, dark complexioned people. And in regards to these gypsy kingdoms, right, it says nothing but patience and the critical examination of scholars can never tell us who such people really were until the last generation or so. Everything has been hearsay, or mostly so. History of the tales of a grandfather's sword has been quite content to accept everything printed as truth. Writers of that kind slumped the earlier nations of Britain under such a comprehensive and vague description as the Picts and Scots. You know, that doesn't really describe them. That's what he's saying. It's like tags. Others tell us a little more by characterizing them as so many black herds, and relate how they crossed the fenny waters of the Forth Basin, the Scythian Vale, in their skin canoes, right, like Indians, and ravaged Wales in southern Britain. But they tell us nothing of the titles of their chiefs. They were only the leaders of these black herds of painted people, or vagabonds, or Picts and Scots. Such leaders, black of skin, All right, such leaders, black of skin, savage in nature, and yet possessed of the evidences of a certain civilization, having jewels, gold ornaments, chessmen of gold, of ivory, or of bone, are confusedly remembered in the popular traditions of Wales of the Western Highlands and probably of other portions of the United Kingdom. And these legendary tales in many cases reveal those savage chieftains as the kings of Reguli or dukes of various neighborhoods, in the center of which is their stronghold, as for example, the castle of the Black Giant Gornach, Gornach, in the Welsh Mabinogion, Mabinogion, or that of the Black Oppressor, or of the Black Knight of Lancashire, or more historically that of the Black Douglas of Galloway. Remember, we broke this down in Volume 1, whose memory is still execrated in that territory. A little further on Chapter 2, continuing says, but Baliol is supposed to have been a Norman, and the outlawed Baileys, being gypsies, must have been men of dark complexion, which the Normans are not supposed to have been, but we know they were. If a descendant of the ex-king had really been a man of swarthy skin, there would have been nothing extraordinary in the matter, since his own niece was married to John, the Black Comyn of Earl of Badenoch. That she herself was white is hinted by the fact that the son of this marriage was styled the Red Comyn, red or ruat, having then the signification of tawny, right? Red didn't mean pale skin, it means tawny, all right? And, they say that might indicate that she was white, it does indicate that she's white. She could have been tawny as well. And having been applied to the half-breed branches of other black clans, such as the Douglases and the Mercers. A daughter of this Ruat Comyn, the Comyn slain by Robert Bruce, was also married to the 10th Douglas chief, and so became the grandmother of Archibald the Black. So at least the descendants of John Balliol's sister became Douglases, which means black. But it is not necessary to assume that his own direct posterity mixed their blood with that of the Moors. Continuing a little further ahead, it says, for in spite of his various allusions to the gypsy eye and to the black blood, that beyond question, all right, black blood that beyond question marks the great majority of gypsies. He yet includes in his list of their various tribes such clans as the Bosvilles, Broadways, Greys, and Smalls, who are pure gypsies and at the same time of fair complexion. Moreover, he says of the class generally, for one cannot in the face of such statements speak of the gypsy race. In the Danubian principalities there are at the present day 3 kinds of gypsies. One, very dark and barbarous. Of course, they're going to add the barbarous to the dark complexion people. Another, light brown and more intelligent. And the third, or elite, of yellow pine complexion, as American boys characterize the hue of quadroons. So not fully pale skin, but you see how they're doing a caste system there, right? Based on complexion. Even in England, there are straight-haired and curly-haired Romanis, and 2 indicating not a difference resulting from white admixture, but entirely different original stocks from different stocks. These 2 last divisions may be held to be fairly represented by the long-haired cave-dwelling Sioux-Tocs of West Highland tradition, the glib Tories of Queen Elizabeth's time, and by the curly-headed Moors of British heraldry. Of what? Of British heraldry, not barbarous people, historic specimens of whom are visible in the curly-haired Swarthy, Silurian Picts. Moving on to chapter 3, it says here the supreme ruler of Alban during one portion of the 10th century was, we have been told, Kenneth or Sinat or Kinat, alias Niger or Dub, the Black. All right. He seems to have reigned for some years over white provinces, in parentheses, they don't know, as well as those inhabited by people of his own color. But he is particularized as the Black of the 3 black divisions, okay? Now remember, we've read, in previous volumes, and we know this person's history. He was not from Africa, his people not from Africa. The names of these divisions, kingdoms, they were then called, are given to us in Gaelic, the language of the so-called white men, and in Latin. So again, we got to dodge some hijinks while we're reading, right? Being thus given, they tell us as little of the designations given to these kingdoms by their own inhabitants, do the words Australia or Patagonia inform us of the language of the Aborigines or the names which they give to their country or to their kings. We have guessed that one division of the posterity of this powerful black king of the 10th century became known to Gaelic-speaking peoples as Maga Dub, shortened into MacDuff, all right, or the clan of the black. MacDuff, the clan of the black, so Duff means black, guys, which race was for a long time paramount in the kingdom of Phoebe, or Five, itself in all probability one of the three black divisions. And we noticed that so recently as Queen Mary's time, a descendant of this clan, though bearing a different surname, was one of the ruling class in that district, and when spoken of was particularized as black. And further, that those of the natives of Five who, 2 centuries after the death of Queen Mary, still continued to follow the fierce marauding habits and to display the haughty, overbearing disposition of the early noble, were to be found among the confederacy of Swarthy gypsies known as the Lokeli Band, who were precisely the kind of gypsies that their historian has in mind when he dilates upon the presumptuous pride, the overweening conceit of a high-melted Scottish gypsy, his boosted descent, a descent at once high, illustrious, and lost in antiquity, his unbounded contempt for the rabble of town and country, and as the earlier Pictish language was unintelligible to the Gauls and to the Normans, so the speech of those 18th century Picts was described as gibberish and jargon by the civilized and modernized portion of the community. Continuing, it says the life of those painted Moors or Faws. Remember, I just showed you that king, Charles Faw. He was very swarthy, the last king crowned. They're saying painted Moors, which is Picts, or Faws, therefore has never been specially described until recent times, or only described from the outside. The names by which their kings are remembered show this. Such names as that by which Niger of the three black divisions is generally known are purely outside names or nicknames given by another people. Kenneth or Kinad or Shinad, when analyzed, seems to mean nothing more than the king, or possibly the chief of the race of Ayet. At any rate, the Sinayet or Shinad Vel Dub, who reigned from 962 to 967, was succeeded by his own brother, also named Kenneth, which seems to show that the name was more a designation than an individual cognomen, and that it belonged to the occupier of a certain position for the time being. This particular Niger would thus be the black, in the sense that his chief rival was the white, and the whelp, or as their contemporary Dubdon satrapas Atoklak, was the black-brown satrap of the Atoli, or as the chief of the Moriman was Dob Harku the other. The most notable of all those who bore this appellation of Kenneth Kinadius Kinat or Kinat Shinat was assuredly the son of Alpin, who was the first king of the Scots, who acquired the monarchy of the whole of Alban and ruled in it over the Scots. All right, we're talking about a so-called black man here. This was in the year 844, the 12th year of Kenneth's reign, and the Chronicle of Huntington tells us that in his 12th year, Kenneth encountered the Picts 7 times in one day, and having destroyed many, confirmed the kingdom to himself. Thus, by the year 844, the black herds of Scots and Picts, somewhat different in manners, but all alike thirsting for blood, had completely fallen out among themselves, and the former had conquered the latter. To use their alternative titles, the vagabond Egyptians, all right, Egyptians, Gypsy, Egyptians, what Egypt? What Egyptians coming from real Egypt, ancient Egypt, to marry America, had overcome the painted blackamoors, the painted blackamoors, the Picts, the latter, it is believed, were half exterminated. So we're talking about, right, Alpine, they're calling him a vagabond Egyptian. The Niger, the black, they're calling him an Egyptian. And then they're calling the Picts the painted blackamoors who he conquered. All right. Though the year 844 did not put an end to the reign of Picts in Scotland. From that date, however, the customs of the Egyptians, Scots proper, must have been paramount for a considerable time in certain parts of North Britain. Whatever the genealogy of this conquering Shinite or Kinite, and he is said to have descended from Swarthy Conal, son of Yellow Equate, he had apparently ruled over the Galloway district before attaining the supreme power, right? This is more on more war, right? Shout out to 432, the Drought Radio, black on black crime. One writer, not of Mr. Skeen's caliber, but at least a recorder of a tradition, says that in 850, Kenneth was Thane of Carrick, and he adds that in the district and in Galloway, which really included that district at one time, where the Kennedys had at one time extensive possessions. The surname Kennedy is to this day pronounced Kennedy, from which we see that name of Kenneth. All right, you guys see that? Kennedys come from Kenneth the Black, right? Or Canadias, or Shinad, or Shinad, had come down to us in the form of Kennedy, as well as in that of Kenneth, and that the earliest Kenneths or Kennedys were probably the same stock as the race named MacDove. All right, remember that was black folks. The clan of Kennedy, the son of Alpine, of the stock of Swarthy Conal and Tawny Elkite, were thus the kings of Carrick 8,000 years ago, guys. Come on now. This is history. They won't tell you. They have whitewashed everything. The Kennedys were originally melanated Swarthy people. The original Kennedys, coming from the MacDuffs, same people, same lines. Kenneth, the black divisions. They remained so for a long time. Scott tells us that the name of Kennedy held so great a sway in that district as to give rise to the popular rhyme. All right, this is the poem right here. The district, the southwestern corner of Scotland, remained therefore under the dominion of the race of Kennedys from the middle of the 9th century onward to very recent times. The designation of the first Kennedy, Shinad, or Kenneth, Hinad, became gradually fossilized in that quarter into a tribal name. It became a tribe, became a family, a clan. The chiefs of those southwestern Kennedys from 840, 850 onward were styled, it is stated, Danes or Kings of Carrick. A title rooted so far down naturally became overshadowed in course of time by the latter creations of an incumbent and successful Norman power, until at length the chiefs of those Kennedys were only remembered locally as Kings of Carrick. So lately as the dawn of the 17th century, the holder of this position was known as King of Carrick, although there had only been one legitimate kingship in Scotland for several generations prior to that. So a little further ahead, I skip a lot, guys, going deep into the Carrick kings, these southern Scottish, Norman Scottish invading families, tribes, clans. It says down here, while the Moravian Scot became known chiefly by the name he had apparently always given to himself, the name of Egyptian. Consequently, the kingship exercised by the Kennedys over the district of Western Galloway was the kingship of his Egyptians or gypsies. They were so-called gypsies, but it was a kingship that had been one of a genuine kind. And just as the Earl of Angus was admitted by the ruling party to have inherited the right of leading the van of the Scottish army, he being nominal leader of the Douglas's Moors or Picts of Galloway, after the overthrow and outlawry of the real chiefs, so was the kinship of Carrick, quite an independent thing from the ownership of all that territory, held to be vested in that Kennedy line. So they became the Earls of Cassilis. All right. Now here it says who it was that took up the kingship of the Carrick Egyptians, when their nominal leaders rose to the higher duties of Scottish nobles, cannot easily be ascertained. It is curious to notice that the Cassilis Egyptian connection did not cease altogether with the death of the last king of Carrick. It was the wife of his successor, the 6th Earl, who eloped with the Fall leader, celebrating the ballad. This event took place about the middle of the 17th century, but the lineage of the Countess' lover, John de Fall, has never been ascertained. It is important to notice how full of gypsy memories this Cassilis neighborhood is. And what do they mean by gypsy memory? We're going to go to that footnote. They actually mean so-called black, right? It says here, and therefore of black memories. The district of Carrick teems with black localities, some of which have been previously given. Morristown, Morristown, dubbed Glasstown, are in the center of the Kennedy country, and such names as these abound in the neighborhood: Dunduff, the Black Dun; Craigdow, the Black Craig; Daldoof, the Black Dale. Black Dales, another form of the preceding. While there are very many Black Burns, Black Locks, and Black Craigs, the Devil's Dyke or Picts Dyke, and therefore the Moors, Blacks, Cars, or Grimm's Dyke, crosses the south of Carrick from west to east, and there is another Black Dyke at its northern boundary, besides a stretch of marsh called Ayers Moss. All right, so these whole references to so-called black, it was because of the people living there, what they look like. We went over this in volume 1. There's a whole chapter on this we read, right? A little further down in chapter 3, it says the Kennedys of the 16th century, where they were pure Scots, were dubglasses or of swarthy skin. All right, the Kennedys of the 1500s were black, so-called black, right? Colored people. All of them, except the very chiefs, lived in turf-covered conical wigwams, like Indians, and gypsy tents, teepees, the common building of their country. The common building of their country. They cooked their food as gypsies. Their superstitions, legends, and manners were those of gypsies. They were gypsies, in parentheses. The only distinction between the men of the two periods is one of degree. By the 18th century, the savage, high-handed ideas of those robber races were almost wholly out of fashion, and the men who persisted in putting them into practice became degraded outlaws. All right, so now we're going to continue to chapter 4, again, of the book Ancient and Modern Britons, volume 2. And it says here, and speaking of gypsies, in parentheses, however, one must discriminate. The greatest family of all the Scottish gypsies, says Mr. Simpson, is that of Bailey. And the Baileys are white men, as their reputed ancestor Baliol, King of Scotland, pretty surely was, according to them. Nevertheless, although more than one gypsologist indicates that pure gypsies may be out and out white men, yet it is beyond question that the generally accepted, representative of that type of man is black-eyed, black-haired, and swarthy-skinned. All right? Remember what we read in volume 1, what we know. If we do not now say light pen as black as a gypsy, we at least say as dark as a gypsy, And this, the main body of the class, is divided by Mr. Leland into two distinct sections, the one straight-haired, the other curly-haired. The two indicating not a difference resulting from white admixture, but entirely different original stocks. Those of us who are dark whites, therefore, may represent in a partial degree either of these stocks or both. Represent only, because the British population has so long been mingled that, as already stated, dark whites and fair whites are often enough brothers, and while the dark brother is the modified representative of a swarthy ancestor, his fair-skinned brother is equally that ancestor's descendant. Accordingly, any dark white or any man owning a dark-skinned or black-haired progenitor cannot be regarded as altogether not akin to the conventional gypsy, whether of the 9th century or of the 19th. But it is probable that the man who wrote about the black herds, Scots and Picts, and who designated the latter division nimble blackamoors, as Claudian did, were themselves of almost or wholly white stock. A little further ahead in chapter 4, it says here, it is true that the bishop regarded these barbarous characters as derived from the Black Danes, being very near akin to Wormius or Ramruner, which he says differed wholly in figure and shape from the common Runai. Whatever they were, it is plain they were unintelligible to a man of mere Latin training. If they were Black Danish, their use in Scotland must have been more recent than the Pictish or the latter Scoto-Pictish dominion. But gypsydom ranges from a quite recent period back to an undefinable limit, and it is within the bounds of possibility that the particular mark of each tribe differed in origin and from of the others. But this is much less likely than that of all the tribal tokens or a legend stamped in common runa. and that the particular mark was only the totem of the clan. And since the bulk of the gypsy class is seen by complexion and other characteristics to belong to the race of Egyptian Scots, all right, and Moors, Picts, it is probable that the prevailing character of these symbols was of the kind intimated by boys who, writing of the almaners of Scotices in all their secret business, they use it not to write with common letters, using among other pebbles, but errors with ciphers and figures of beasties made in manner of letters, seek their epithets and superscriptions above their sepulturis shoe, and that the determined and excusable persecution of these Scottish Egyptians, whose alternate title of Scot gradually floated away from its original possessors and became the national designation of the hybrid Scotch people, and the attitude which the best part of the Scotch people eventually reached, namely the regarding of a habit and repute Egyptian as the equivalent of everything shiftless, savage, and irreconcilable. Continuing says, therefore, when Boise and his fellow Scotchman, Leslie, described the ancient manners of the Scots, it is an absolute certainty that they had in view the Egyptians of Scotland, all right? And consequently the barbarous character that neither Bishop Nicholson nor the peaceful traders and hinds who received those passes could read, must have been mainly, if not wholly, those of ciphers and figures of beasties made in manners of letters that the Egyptian Scots had made use of from the earliest times. In short, they were Egyptian hieroglyphics, guys. Listen. Farther, the symbols and pictures that are carved upon the well-known sculpture stones of Scotland must be the work of the same Egyptian people. All right, they ain't talking about modern Egypt, guys. They're talking about ancient Egyptians from America, the real Tamari, real ancient Egypt. Bosie distinctly says so. In all their secret business, the Egyptians of Scotland used not to write with common letters used among other peoples, but formerly with ciphers and figures of beasts made in manners of letters, such as their epitaphs and superscriptions above their sepulchres show that the sepulchre stones are of sepulchral nature, is what all the best modern architectuaries are agreed upon. And here is a 15th century writer stating as a matter of course that the sculptors were the early Egyptians of Scotland. Whatever of uncertainty and error may attach to the conclusions reached in the foregoing pages, now, at any rate, we are on solid ground. Ethnology tells us that one stream of modern British blood has come down from a common source with that of the aboriginal people of Egypt. All right, this is what I'm trying to explain to you guys. All right, from ancient America, the true old world, to Mary. Where's the true Egypt? Check out my previous videos. And that connects to the Picts. And that's what I was saying. A lot of these ancient tribes with the British Isles were coming from the Americas. They even have it in, in Ireland, Greater Ireland. Greater Ireland is in the Americas. I got the future video, okay? Tradition states that our islands were overrun at an early period by Swarthy Moravian tribes, okay? Of which one section alleges descent from the daughter of a pharaoh. Daughter of a pharaoh. All right, we got the juicy part here, from whom they took their name of Scot. That word, therefore, becoming synonymous with vagabond in the speech of the Celtic peoples who tried to repel these invaders. This name Scot did not cease until at most 2 centuries ago to designate one particular division of the people of North Britain, although by a common freak of nomenclature, it also became identified with the heterogeneous Scottish nation, and that particular division was composed of those dusky, ferocious, right? Pagan and magic working Egyptians, Magi, Druids, Chaldeans, come on, whose ideas and practices were the more peaceable and civilized of the Scottish people, have always regarded with abhorrence, for which reason this element of semi-Christianity, though doing the greatest violence to its professed creed, continually fought against and eventually persecuted and hunted down all those who perversely remained habit and repute Egyptians, so that the title was at length equivalent to outlaw and criminal. You guys hear that? And it's very liable to be killed without mercy. The name Egyptian in parentheses, loosely and erroneously given to a whole class, is still claimed by certain of the Scottish gypsies, who believed themselves to be the Pharaoh's folk. Okay, this is where it's coming from. As gypsies and Faws, they were, till quite lately, dictators of the whole of Scotland, so far as concerned the safety of travellers passing through the various provinces into which they had divided that country, each province the home of a certain tribe, and obeying the laws of its tribal chief, and all the provinces and all those tribal chiefs recognizing the supremacy of one ruling family. As Egyptians, or as Scots and Moors, or Picts, listen, precisely the same thing is recorded of them, except that under these names they had undoubted power and a historical position. As gypsies, we have seen that each tribe protected the infringement of its territory by a system of passes issued by the higher caste, and there may yet be proof that this custom was in full force during the historic age of the Scoto-Pictish kingdom, as manifestly it must have been. The writing upon these tokens was illegible to men of modern English education, and was only so many barbarous characters in the eyes of a bishop of presumed Latinity. In all their secret business, these gypsies used not to write with common letters used among other peoples. Listen, we do not actually know that the characters impressed upon such tribal tokens were ciphers and figures of beasts made in manners of letters. All right, they're just talking about hieroglyphics, though that is very probable. We do know, however, that the Swarthy dwellers in the Hebridean wigwams, again, Swarthy dwellers in the Hebridean wigwams, just like Indians of last century, wore upon their persons broad plates of silver or brass, curiously engraven with various animals. And we do know that prior to the 15th century, the ciphers and figures of beasts made in manners of letters, which the Scots proper of that period made use of in their secret business, were identical with those composing the epitaphs and superscriptions above their tombs, and this confronts us with the sculptured stones of Scotland. These have been sketched, their inscriptions transcribed and deeply studied, and the result of these studies published by men of great linguistic and antiquarian knowledge, who are indeed the only kind of men qualified to discuss such a subject. There are, of course, differences of opinion as to their meaning and their probable age. On this last point, Colonel Forbes Leslie makes these remarks. The sandstone on which so many of the Roman inscriptions taken from the walls of Hadrian and Antonius are graven is not to be compared in durability to Aberdeenshire granite. Yet Roman inscriptions carry us back 16 or 1700 years. Listen, not that far ago. Listen to what they're telling you. This is 1880s. There is therefore no limit within the historical or even the traditionary period to which sculptures in Aberdeenshire granite need be restricted, so far as depends on arguments founded on the wasting effects of atmospheric action on the surface of the stone. So he's saying you can't even date these things right here that nobody knows, even with their modern, carbon datings. By far the greatest number, and those of most interest in the sculptured stones in which there is no Christian emblem, are found in Aberdeenshire and are of Aberdeenshire granite. Against this, however, must be placed the effects of time in raising the superficies of the earth, principally through the agency of worms. We have lately been told, thereby rendering it improbable, that an upright stone would be visible at the present day, had it been reared at a very remote period. The sculptured stones of Scotland, dotted here and there over the country, are found in greatest numbers in the northeastern district. Of their inscriptions, it is said, some of these emblems indisputably, and all of them probably, are of Oriental derivation. All right, guys, hear that? Now remember what they're talking about, these inscriptions, same ones they're finding in America, Old World inscriptions. All right, they're finding more classic versions in the Americas of these same inscriptions. The most remarkable of these are the double disc and scepter, crescent and scepter, the altar and scepter, and hawk, serpent and scepter, elephant, horse, bull, boar, bird of prey, human figure with dog's head, all right, like Anubis, like Shalot, all right, you guys hear that? Anubis, fish, dog's head, horseshoe, arch, mirror, mirror case, comb case, etc. To these may be added lions, apes, camels, dragons, and other monsters, and the interlinked loop known as Solomon's seal. As these are admittedly sepulchral monuments, the most natural explanation of such devices is that they were the badges of totems of the dead. Thus, the crescent would be the proper emblem for one of the many moss-tropen thieves or gypsies of the border country, of whom Scott says that the heavenly bodies form their favorite crest. The dog's head would represent any of that dog-headed battalion of the clan of the king of Ruale. Already noticed, the bull, such a man as the bovine-headed figure of the Oeland sculptures, or the cowskin-clad thinker of Cornish tradition, or any one of the cows and heifers of Sutherlandshire. The serpent, any native of Ederdale, the boar, such a warrior as the 15th century black-skinned boar of the Hebrides, and the horse such as a giant with horse's ears, as that one slain at the battle near Ballybeg Abbey, County Cork, and the time of all the battles. In this way, the lion would indicate the grave of one of the race of Dub of the three black divisions, who, the lion, and the elephant, one of the progenitors of the Oliphant clan, both of these tribes having borne such cognizance. And the dragon might fitly be carved upon the tombstone of any one of the sons of Uishnak, who are remembered as the three dragons of Dunmonach. The addition of the scepter might be taken to denote that a king was buried below, while the altar may possibly bear reference to a priest. It is doubtful to what extent the drawings of animals, now strangers to Britain, are tests of the foreign extraction of the artist. Although camels were not familiar objects in this country at the date of the Norman conquest, or soon after, they were not unknown. All right, listen, the Irish annals record that in the year 1105, a camel, which is an animal of wonderful size, was presented by the king of Alban to Muirsertach O'Brien. And no doubt it was not the only one imported. All right, camels. And you know, camels originated in North America, right, guys? Like, we got the video on that. We got the proof, science. You can follow that. You can research that. So it might have even been coming from America. Besides this, it is sometimes argued that because the elephants carved upon Scottish monoliths show by their grotesque outlines that the artist had never seen a living elephant, therefore, the forefathers of such a man belonged originally to a warmer climate than that of Britain. This, however, need not have been the case. The artist may have learned incorrectly enough the appearance of an elephant, and that by tradition, although his ancestors had inhabited Britain for an illimitable period. Mr. Bonwick has some remarks bearing closely upon this. Listen to this. A human skull near Falkirk, he states, was discovered 20 feet below the surface and associated with a fossil elephant. Humans being buried and found with elephants, all right? In Essex, such remains have been side by side with the hippopotamus and rhinoceros, which then roamed about all England, all right? They were in England back in the day when they was connected to the Atlantis. At Curra, an older Irishman, then the Celt hunted after what we call the fossil elk. The Betages, or slaves of the Celts, may have been his descendants. In the limestone caves of the Devonshire, the skeletons of men are found beside those of the hippopotamus, elephant, rhinoceros, lion, hyena, bear, and reindeer. It wasn't just Africa, guys, and you know those animals just got there. No one can tell at what date the last lion, elephant, or hippopotamus of the British Islands was seen and slain. If tradition is to be believed, the last named of these was of very recent date, comparatively speaking, for the Celtic legends are full of stories of water horses and water bulls. All right, the Celtics saw them; they were there when the so-called Celtics were there. But as this may have another and wholly different explanation, this point need not be pressed. At any rate, it is not impossible that descendants of the man who hunted the living British elephant may have incised his likeness, though not very faithfully, upon pillars of Aberdeen granite. There is indeed a curious hint of such a traditional elephant in the form of the supporters of the Oliphant shield. The earliest known chief of this tribe seems to have been a David the Oliphant, one of those 12th century Scottish barons who accompanied King David of Scotland, Prester John, in his unsuccessful invasion of England. Likely enough, this David of Oliphant was a Norman, but the people of the district over which he ruled may have been British for countless generations. At any rate, the supporters of that shield, two elephant proper, are according to a very carefully drawn representation of the year 1826, delineated with tufts of shaggy hair upon the haunch, unlike any elephant that a modern herald could have seen, though suggestive of some animal that had not lost all resemblance to the hairy mammoth. Told you, bringing them from the Americas maybe. Accordingly, those creatures on the Scottish monuments need not of necessity be exotic, though strangers to this country for a long period. All right, they were actually there though. But with regard to others of the inscriptions, there is no doubt some of these emblems, indisputably, are of Oriental derivation, says Colonel Forbes Leslie, and a more recent authority, speaking less dogmatically, but with conviction, has expressed the opinion that the inscriptions upon the Newton stone in the Guttield, Aberdeenshire, form a compound of Oriental and Western ideas, beliefs, and languages, and among these elements he includes the Egyptian. All right, the Egyptians there. Inscriptions of this variety are not emblematic, but are written in various recognized characters. That one stone, such as the Newton stone, should bear on its surface an inscription that unites Greek with Irish, Gothic, and Egyptian is extremely probable. Whatever the origin, the Americas, of an incoming race, it could not possibly preserve its distinctive features for several centuries, unaffected in the slightest degree by the customs of those with whom it came in contact. Though the Egyptian Scots were at first, all right, somewhat different in manners from the painted Moors who were their allies in the invasion of South Britain, such an alliance would of itself result in a blending of ideas, of manners, of speech, and of blood, and this again would be affected by the invasions of later races. Therefore, when a man's investigations lead him to see a mixture of several languages and creeds in one individual inscription on a Scottish monument, the likelihood is that his conjectures are pretty correct. The belief in an Eastern origin of certain intra-British languages and peoples is very old, all right, and very old-fashioned. Now, when they say in Eastern, in ancient times, and the maps were flipped, so where's the real East? The farthest East is the Americas. And again, they had this belief, right? There is, I believe, a massive presumptive evidence in his favor in what is called the Gaelic language. Remember, connected to the Hebrew. We got videos on that. Remember who went over there. Remember, they're finding Gaelic and all this here and the inscriptions here in the Americas, guys. Those of us who know little or nothing of Gaelic can guess at its heterogeneous character from the fact already noticed that when Shaw's Gaelic dictionary was brought out 100 years ago, it was pronounced by others of his fellow countrymen to be something that was not Gaelic. Whatever it was not Gaelic. You guys hear that? And it was also noticed that an eminent living student of Scottish Gaelic has stated that that form in use a few centuries ago was very different from the spoken and written at the present day. Okay? In whatever part of the world and at whatever epoch the language of the so-called white man reached maturity, it is plain that it has become greatly altered in various places and in varying degrees by amalgamation with other forms of speech. Black speech, in parentheses, for example, a last century archaeologist, with what correctness I do not know, makes these statements regarding this question. If they, the inhabitants of ancient Scotia, right, now Ireland, had not an intercourse in former days with the Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Persians, how is it possible so many hundreds of words, so many idioms of speech, so many technical terms in the old arts of those ages could have been introduced into the old Irish dialect? All right. Where's the true old world? Where's these so-called Phoenicians, so-called Egyptians, so-called Persians? Descendants of Elam. Elamites, Elam is a son of Shem. Irish. What people the Egyptians and Irish accepted named the harp or music Winnie Irish Annie. Remember the harp, David's harp? Remember? Check out my videos, Israel and the Nations of Europe. Check out my Danes videos, my Danite videos. What people in the world, the Orientalists and the Irish accepted, called the copy of a book the son of a book, and echoed the daughter of a voice. With what northern nation the Irish accepted can the Oriental names of the tools and implements of the stone cutter, the carpenter, the shipbuilder, the weaver be found? And with what people the old Irish and Egyptians accepted does the word ogum signify book? In the name of Hercules or Mercury doth? If only one half of these queries be grounded on positive truth, the connection between the Old East and the latter West is most distinctly proved by the evidence of language. There are questions that belong to Egyptology rather than Gypsyology, though it is difficult to say where the one begins and the other ends. And as gypsies, in parentheses, are all of races, so are these references to Persians and Phoenicians not out of place. For like gypsy, Egyptian must be taken to include a good deal. Assyrian, Jewish, Chaldean, as well as Phoenician and Persian. All right, Chaldean, Ireland of the Chaldees. Remember my Ireland and Chaldea video, what it's telling us about the British Isles, the true summer. Come on now, let's go back to that and put it all together. The black art, dubbed Shaleslat of the conjurers and magicians, Druidian of early Britain, was regarded by Pliny as almost identical with that practiced by the Magi of Persia. Come on now. That is Chaldea, Chaldeans, Magi. It's the same place. They had you looking at the wrong place this whole time. And the enchanters, magicians, and wise men attached to the court of the Pharaoh mentioned in the book of Exodus were akin to both of these in custom. Just like the Druids, the Luith Meseth and the Fotham Moran, worn by the Druidhen of ancient Scotia, were, it has been observed, identical with the breastplates and the Urim and Tumim of Jewish and Chaldee priests. All right, more connections. We're not even talking about that today, but you guys see? Do you guys see? Again, check out those videos I've done, guys, if you're new to the channel. I know we're just reading a book here, but we got so many sources, so much corroboration to what is being said right here, which is not at all remarkable. If those priests of Ireland were early Scots, that is, Egyptians, the hieroglyphical tablets of early Scots, their long clipped tresses, and the ruddle with which they smeared their dusky faces, dusky, dark complexion, may all be matched in Egypt and Assyria, just like in those places, what the real Egypt. While such varieties of the magic just referred to as sun worship, serpent worship, astrology, soothsaying or fortune telling, and also the customs of passing children through the fire to Baal and the burying of the dead in sarcophagi are as much the property of the British Islands as of the East. Okay, again, that is a true ancient land. That's what I was trying to tell Paul. Shout out to Paul with the geopolymer. He's finding all the British Isles right there in England. So I told him, hey, that's these people we're talking about right here, the ancient world. And most of these properties have remained longest in the possession of those Tory classes, commonly called gypsies. You guys hear that? All that we just went through. The divining rod with which the magician of the court of the pharaohs performed his incantations was swayed also by the British druid and by the Bon Druid, female gypsy or witch also. And just as this modern sibyl of the hedgerows refuses to prophesy unless her palm is crossed with silver, so have her kidney done in Britain as far back as the days of Caesar. Caesar. Like these also, she pretends to gain her prophetic knowledge from the stars. Pimble rigging, the peculiar property of those classes who, in Mr. Leland's opinion, are more or less of gypsy blood, and who, according to Mr. Simpson, are distinctly gypsies, is of Egyptian origin to marry ancient America, or at least was a practice of ancient Egypt, America. The Moorish dance, or Blackamoor's dance, all right? Again, the Moorish dance or Moor's dance or Blackamoor dance, so distinctly a British dance, that Handel regarded it as the national dance of our country was even so recently as the era of the Five Shire Gypsies described by Mr. Simpson scarcely one remove better than the degrading rite of the worshippers of Osiris. You guys hear that? Survivals of such worship may be seen, says Mr. Groom in his Britannica Gypsy article, in the honor paid by the three great German gypsy clans to the fir tree, the birch, and the hawthorn, and in the veneration of which Welsh gypsies hold the fasciated vegetable growth known as the broado coro. The same low religion, Colonel Forbes Leslie points out in his chapter on Menhirs, has been firmly rooted in Armorica and Brittany, and in portions of the British Islands. Of the serpent worship with which this is inextricably mingled traces may also be found, or may be also found, in various phrases, stories, emblems, and customs belonging to gypsies in general, says the article in the encyclopedia, and a relic of this is also visible in the Gaelic language, in which there is one word for serpent and father. And as the effect of such beliefs, it has been shortly remarked by an observer who has been already quoted that the area which is most thickly studded with the sculptured stones of Scotland is that in which the Christian ideas of marriage have found least favor. It is also worthy of notice that in the language of the so-called white man, the word dub chest, literally black enigma, is rendered by Armstrong not only as a puzzle, an enigma, but also as a model, a superscription. In the first two instances, it might be understood as meaning nothing more than a dark saying, which expression may be derived with equal reason from the darkness or obscurity of the thing it expresses, and from the complexion of such people as those who were essentially adepts in magic. It was black folks doing that, or black art. But it is difficult to see why a model, a superscription, should be designated a black enigma, dub-chased, unless one particular class of superscriptions was originally signified by this name, the class of superscriptions to which Boyce or Boise refers when he speaks of the epithets of ciphers and figures of beasts made in manners of letters, inscribed on the gravestones of the early Scots, Scots proper, or Egyptians of Scotland. Continuing a little ahead, it says here the presumptive evidence that enables one to hold the early Scots and the Egyptians of Scotland as one and the same people cannot, I think, be gainsaid. Their traditional descent from Scotia, the daughter of a pharaoh, may be counted as worth little, but their origin has been indicated in many ways as regards their complexion. We saw that they were slumped together with the Picts of Scotland, whom Claudian calls the nimble blackamoors, not wrongly named the painted people. And these Picts and Scots were spoken of by a civilized South Britain as so many black herds, somewhat different in manners but all alike, thirsting for blood. The earliest British home of these Scot Egyptians was Ireland, Chaldea, and the conglomerate speech of that country is full of words and expressions that are paralleled in ancient Egypt, right? The true old world, America, is connected, guys, to so-called Atlantis. Remember, that was part of Atlantis, Ireland. It was connected, Ireland, all the way to Trinidad. Remember the legends of Trinidad? While its soil has yielded up the emblems of Chaldean priests, okay, whether there is a connection between the clipped locks of the wild or black Irishman, the black Irish, remember my two videos on that, and those of the sculptured Egyptians may be questioned. But at any rate, the hieroglyphics of the early Scots, if not identical with the hieroglyphics of the ancient Egyptians, or one division of the people coming under that all-embracing term, coming out of Egypt, were at least based upon the same principle. The Egyptian and British customs and attainments, religious and otherwise, sun worship, fire worship, serpent and phallus worship, astrology, soothsaying, fortune telling, and other forms of divination, all these have just been glanced at. These were equally the property of the Magi of Britain, the Magi of the Pharaohs, and the Magi of Persia, Chaldea, and Pliny and whose authority the last of these comparisons is made, states that the early Britons, or a section of them, were as black as Ethiopians. Okay, the early Britons, black as Ethiopians. According to Mr. Skeen and other students, South Britain contained, at the date of the Roman invasion, two very distinct types of men, and one of these said to be the earlier, Mr. Skeen regarded as closely akin to the Caledonians of Scotland, the Caledonians, Caledonia, who were so far Egyptians in that they were painted people, blackamoors, and probable Australioids, or the red painted people from Nova Scotia, seafarers. For the Australioid skulls of Cutness were found in a district once known as Pictland. Again, they're finding what they appear to be people that look like the Australian Aborigines, right, in the British Isles, guys, and in Nova Scotia. These people might be the red paint people traveling seafaring the world. For the Australioid skulls, all right, we read that already. They were found in Pictland, right? And though this does not prove their owners to have been Maori or Picti, there may be evidence yet forthcoming to warrant such a belief. Indeed, the early Scot and the early Pict are, like their modern representatives, the Egyptian or Gypsy, okay, and the Fa, not easily distinguished the one from the other. Remember, we just saw what the last king of the Falls looked like earlier. I colorized the picture. The early Scotti, Pictish Scots, painted vagabonds of Argyllshire, belonging as much to the first division as to the second. And that's the end of chapter 4, guys. We're going to actually leave it right here. It's going to get pretty good. I just wanted to get through those first 4 chapters a little bit. You guys can go ahead and get the book and read the full chapters yourselves. A lot of info I skipped, but I just wanted kind of breeze through that as we get into the other chapters, since he was kind of doing a little review with a little bit more detail of what we read in volume 1. So I hope you guys enjoyed this reading from today. This all connects with what we've been learning about the true old world, about the connection of America, so-called Atlantis, with the British Isles, of the antiquity of the British Isles, the Irish people, and how that's connected to so-called Phoenicians and Egyptians. You know, guys, put all the information together, and you start seeing a bigger picture where these people are really coming from when they're saying they're coming from ancient, the old world, right? Oriental, they're calling it Oriental or Eastern. All right, so again, that was a little review of chapters 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're gonna get into chapter 5. Probably gonna read the whole chapter. Chapter 5 book gets pretty interesting as we go. Remember what we read before in volume 1. If you haven't checked out the whole series, again, this was part 10 of this reading of this book. We read volume 1, many chapters fully. Go ahead and check that out. Hope you guys enjoyed today's reading. A lot of very good, interesting info, making more connections, and reminding everybody that there was a lot of so-called black or Swarthy people in the British Isles in ancient times. Much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.
Robert Dre, bye.